Welcome to the Mo podcast.
A place where individual stories come to life.
This is how we need to be communicating with people. This is how we support people's personal development.
It's important to speak about people believing in people.
The more you're able to let go of your limitation, the more you step into your power, your inner authentic power.
Mo, a place for me, others, everyone.
Welcome, Robbie, and welcome, listeners, to a Mo Podventures episode. Here we're joined by Robbie Swale. Big welcome.
Hey, Alex, it's great to be here.
And as always with our guests, I'd love for you to introduce yourself by telling us a little bit about who you are and how you go through life without any reference to a job title or your age or your relation to another human being.
I mean, it's such a great challenge because we're so conditioned to reference those things, aren't we? Yeah, like, I'm a really curious person.
Mm-hmm.
We've been talking about learning, and that's been a part of me for a long time. These days, being outdoors is really important to me.
Mm-hmm.
We moved into the countryside a couple of years ago, and that's been a big adjustment. But being able to be outdoors in much more open spaces has become more and more important. Yeah, and I guess I'm quite, I'm driven by my curiosity. I'm also driven by a kind of, what do I get? I get like I don't know, I get pulled along by creative forces as well. Some of the time.
Brilliant. And just give us one example of like a creative force that might move you.
Yeah, so like, I think that, this is a bit philosophical for two questions in or something,
No,
but,
we love it.
We get those kinds of, well, I think we can think of reality and as much of our experience of being about, two underlying forces, and sometimes people call it order and chaos, and a bit more easy to get my handle on in life is stability and novelty.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I have a little, like, more than average tendency to novelty. So if I think about, so I had a mentor years ago, and he had us doing an exercise at the end of the year to write down our most enjoyable successes from the year just gone and the most meaningful successes from the year just gone. Great exercise to do. Of course, there's lots of interesting things. So you make the list, and as many as possible, all the enjoyable successes and all the meaningful ones. And then he had us do top fives or top tens, I can't remember. And then, of course, compare the lists and what are the overlaps and what are the patterns.
Yeah.
And enjoyment for me, they were all new things.
Mm-hmm.
So there was meaning in continuing things, in doing the same thing again, finishing this thing, running the program for the fourth time, seeing how much better we'd got. That's meaningful, but it wasn't all the enjoyable stuff was stuff I did for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I'm just not the kind of person that in my work, for example, or business, that I haven't yet found the point where I stay with one thing for a while. There's always another idea, a thing to build on, something to come out.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. And slightly light-hearted question, just because you mentioned it, and now it's in my head. When you mentioned chaos, would you describe yourself, or have you ever been described as an agent of chaos?
I thought you were going to say, for some reason, and this might be, I thought you were going to say as a chaos warrior, which is a very geeky Warhammer reference for people who don't get that. But I thought you might get it for some reason. An agent of chaos, I don't think I have. But, and I think, actually, for what it's worth in this moment, lightheartedly, Chaos Warrior feels like a better fit. So someone who's able, willing, and up for using chaos. But Agent of Chaos sounds like chaos has sent me down to, like, run around and mess up this world, which,
subterfuge.
Maybe what's the difference? Like, maybe that's just a kind of different read on it. An agent of chaos could be like the jester. The archetypal jester in the king's court, who's there to like take the mick out of everybody and disrupt the solemnity of the court or whatever. But yeah, I like it, Agent of Chaos. Maybe by the time this comes out, that'll be my new URL.
Bottom of a LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Robbie Swale, Agent of Chaos.
Exactly.
Great. Works at chaos. And continue on the introduction. Give us an overview of your portfolio career in this moment.
That's a nice way of putting that. I like your questions, Alex. Yeah. So I still, at the moment, think of myself first and foremost as a coach. That's the kind of backbone of my work. And I mostly call myself an executive coach these days.
Yep.
Like on my LinkedIn, that's what it actually says. Well, it's one of the things it says. And I think that's because I get this sense that work with leaders in organizations is where I'm headed. So I want to kind of name, when I introduce myself, I always want to be naming, maybe this is Agent of Chaos again, naming the future a little bit in my introduction. So it's like not just naming what's now, but also naming what the future might be.
I think that's great practice.
But for a long time, I've thought of myself as a leadership coach, and that's what the actual work is. It's all about leadership, whether that's with a parent or about a coach or about a leader in an organization. And I don't have any attachments to that, but it's useful to have labels for other people to see. So there's that one-to-one work. And that's what I think of as that's really what I got into this for, or my route into having a portfolio career was that. And it's still in lots of ways the bit that brings me most alive. But that's not everything. So alongside that, these days I have to also acknowledge that I'm a writer. So I've got a series of 4 books, and I write like more than almost anyone I know. I publish more writing than almost anyone I know, maybe than anyone I can think of. But this is quite I've had a really interesting identity shift recently around this, where I caught that as an idea and was like, ooh, I wonder at one point, and if or when I might be a writer who also happens to coach. And what is that? When I think about some of the writing projects that, for example, the creativity things is pulling me on towards, it's like, oh, if I was to in 10 years have published 12 books, would it still be accurate to call me coach who is also a writer?
Yeah.
Or is it something different? So there's writing. You can read lots and lots of things that I've written on the internet in different places. I'm a podcaster. And that includes, I've got 2 podcasts, including one for coaches called The Coach's Journey. And as part of my portfolio of coaching work, alongside the kind of leadership stuff, is work with coaches. So I really believe in the importance of coaching as a skill set and coaches as a part of the ecosystem for everything that we're facing now. And so part of my work, it's usually like, I don't know, in terms of income, it's usually between 10 and I think once it was like 30%, but mostly it's between 10 and 20% of my income comes from work with coaches. But that podcast is important to me, and people can check that out. We can talk about it more. And in there, there's a model for coaches called the Coaching Business Flywheel, which is kind of what I've learned from the last 10 years of the curiosity bit, trying to understand how does this business work? Like, what does it look like? And that's now in a model, which you can just get on the Coach's Journey website. And then there's this kind of, what else is there? And then there's like the other training, facilitation, workshops, speaking things that I do. That is like, is all a bit weird. I do sometimes, like I've got some, people who call themselves a keynote speaker, I always think that's a bit funny. And that's not, don't think I've ever been the keynote at anything, but I have spoken at some pretty big things and at some interesting events and that kind of thing. Oh no, I have been. I think I might have been billed as keynote speaker once, so that could go on my LinkedIn as well. But it's really just like, those are the chances to share the ideas that I've had with bigger audiences. And so they've always happened a bit by accident. I'm trying to be a little bit more strategic about it now, because it's interesting to me. It's like interesting what's possible, and it uses some of the skills that I have, that not everyone has, that I don't always use if I'm just doing one-to-one work. And so that's there too. And for example, at the moment, one of the creative projects that's been pulling me along that I'm kind of thinking about that is I've got a new model that's just gone public yesterday, actually, about productivity as we record. And by the time it comes out, people will be able to get it. So you can get it. And it's called meaningful productivity. And so that's like, I think if you were to ask me this question in a couple of years, I don't know this for sure, but it's possible that that will look like a bigger part of it by then, because it's a thing that I'm really interested in and seems to be really resonating with people.
Brilliant.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I make money from or like forms part of the career. I think that's pretty much it. But then there's like lots of people who do this kind of work. That doesn't mention all the things I do, because I'm sometimes a podcast editor, and I'm sometimes a web editor or a bookkeeper and all that kind of thing as well. But that gives you some kind of picture of the kind of shape of it all.
Yeah, that's great. And that's exactly what I was hoping for. And just to get into quantifying it a little bit more. Writer, coach, podcast, facilitation, speaking / other. Roughly, if you were to break this down into a pie chart, like what percentage of your work, a typical work week or month, is writing, is coaching, is podcasting?
Yeah. That's a really good question. My brother was telling me that it's an exercise that one of his mentors gave him to do that. Like that it's a really useful exercise to do, to work out, like, at the moment, what is your pie chart of how your time and energy is spent, and then crucially, what would the ideal be?
Yeah.
And then what's the mismatch? So good question. And honestly, I don't know. What does it feel like? So keeping the coach's journey bit going, that's quite a lot. Energetically, that's quite a lot. I don't do all the podcasts anymore because I wanted it felt like it needed to grow, and I was holding it back a little bit. So I've got a team there. So it's a little bit more like leading a team over on that bit. But in terms of income, like I say, that's like 10 to 20% from the work with coaches.
Yep.
I mean, and not all of that is directly from the coach's journey. The coaching work really varies. And then, but it might be that that's like, I don't know, a third to half. Also the leadership coaching work. And then you've got a big chunk at the moment, like there's more facilitation, speaking workshops than there have been in the past. And they are often, because of the way I work, they're often, again, quite high energy because they're rarely just repeating the same thing. Because basically, I don't really believe in that. Even delivering a talk on a similar subject to a different organization, I'm going to want to know about the organization's context. I'm going to want to know about the type of people that are going to be there. And I'm going to want to adjust whatever I said last time for what I've learned since I said it. So that at the moment, and it also costs me quite a lot of energy to do a talk in front of a lot of people some of the time. And then writing is a really interesting one. So most of my writing, as I think you know, happens through a writing practice that I've had a long time, which is, so my series of books is called the 12-minute method. And I basically write an article in 12 minutes every week. And that's the staple of my writing. And if you write an article in 12 minutes every week, like I do, and then you post it, that's one of that, basically that straight away means that you're in the, I don't know, I'm guessing this, but the top 5% of people who write and publish the most, right? So in terms of time, it's not that much. And then I wish, what I discovered at the end of last year when I was having this thinking about, am I really underneath this a writer rather than a coach? And the coaching is what got me to writing. And they're kind of symbiotic because the writing helps me process things, that helps me then coach better, and the coaching helps me think about how humans work, which gives me fuel for the writing. But one of the reasons that I got interested in that was because I was really buzzing off having a few clear days in the autumn and just spending them on more complex writing projects that I've had in mind for a while. And I don't at the moment, partly for economic reasons, because business was slower last year than it has been for the last few years, slower in 2024. I'm holding less time for that kind of thing at the moment and giving more time to things that are more tightly linked to income. So it's like if a client wants a meeting, I used to, at different times, I've held a whole day a week for more creative projects, but actually I decided I wanted to free myself up a little bit on that this year.
Okay, thank you. And we know with portfolio careers and with people who are freelance or self-employed, we never have full control over that work structure. But what conscious decisions have you made around how you structure maybe your work days, maybe your work weeks, or maybe on the longer term?
Yeah, so one of them is that when my older daughter Leah was born and I took paternity leave, I closed my business down for like 4 weeks, I think. When I came back, I was just like, I've never thought that the dream was to work 5 days. So I stopped doing that at that point. So I work 4 days a week and have done, she's 4 and a bit now. So that's 4 years of just working 4 days. And what I found was that there were a few moves I had to do in that first 6 months to stop feeling frantic. I can talk about what they were. Mostly tactical moves, mostly like just wasting time on stuff that didn't need to be wasted on. Like accidentally losing it was much more costly at that point to accidentally lose an hour or an hour and a half in my inbox or my LinkedIn messages than it had been before when I had an extra day. So there was some compression of time. But actually, I made more money in the few years after that. This last year was a bit of a dip, and I think that was partly some decisions I made and partly economic. But actually, when I went to 4 days, that led to my 3 most successful years, with pretty much the next 3 years after that. So it certainly was not clear that it was damaging to my business, and it looks like it might have even been beneficial to my business to do that.
Yeah.
I personally don't like working in the evenings and the weekends. That's part of how I both manage my social energy and also renew. And so I tend to work, these days I work kind of like 9 till like 5:30, so pretty standard office hours. Early on, a crucial thing for me was I read a book that was really impactful for me called The War of Art, and in it, this guy Stephen Pressfield says the people who, so he says like, what's the quote? The quote is like, there's a secret that writers know that wannabe writers don't. The hard part isn't writing, the hard part is sitting down to write. He basically says the way, and this is true for other things, not just writing, any kind of creative practice, being self-employed, being a good one. Like the way, he says the way to beat all the ways you avoid it is to treat it like you would treat a boring job, i.e. show up at the start and leave at the end of the day and take some money, but it's not all about the money, and take it seriously, but not too seriously. And so I took that to heart in a lot of ways, which is why I basically work office hours. Now I bend that sometimes. I'll do the Coach's Journey community calls, which is my group coaching program. That they happen in the evening, just because that's where they started. And now, of course, everyone who goes to them can go in that slot. So I'm leaving them there. Yeah, like I say, I do a little bit more work in the evenings now, actually, because I've got 2 young children. Like I was just noticing that like it was feeling a little tight for the things that I wanted to do if I was only working. I mean, ideally, I don't actually start work till 10 because I like more spacious morning with some reading in it and more exercise. But actually, if I do that every day and I finish at kind of, actually sometimes at 5 because I want to go and do a nursery pickup, and I have a meeting with my wife about kind of household stuff on Thursday mornings. And then if I'm holding, which I used to do, Fridays for more creative projects, then actually the kind of client delivery bit of my week is like 2.5 short days.
Yeah.
So I'm flexing that a little bit more now and kind of playing with my boundaries, letting myself do little bits of work in the evening when I have the energy and really listening to that. And we could probably say more about that and what I've done with that over time. But for me, that's that's where I am at the moment.
Brilliant. Yeah, I really love on this podcast platforming the changes, the hacks, the clever things that people learn about themselves and how they work best, given the large degree of freedom. Had one guest that just stands out in mind. They kept their calendar or agenda was an A4 book, such that it couldn't be carried around with them. So always lived at home. So every single invite, they'd say, this is something I'm really interested in. Let me check my schedule when I get home, and I'll be able to send you a message, an email, or call you and let you know wherever it's possible. Radical, to my mind. Absolutely radical.
And I can just imagine that person, that just creates so much spaciousness around it. One of my colleagues that I used to work on a leadership program with, she would tell a story that she had a challenge for herself at one point, which I imagine had the same impact. But I can tell you what happened for her. Her rule was, I think, unless it might have been a friend of hers, the rule was you have to give yourself 24 hours before you say yes or no. So that you're not saying you're not saying yes out of the social pressure in the situation to say yes. Yeah. And I imagine that physical diary hack has a good effect on that. That's very cool.
I'm also thinking as well that it brings maybe a certain solemnity. It makes it a solemn act, and like it maybe feels a bit like a ledger. This is a serious document. It's in A4, and that I'm spending time. I'm spending such a precious resource. I love that idea.
And also that there's something about the physical. I don't know if this actually is true of the diary, but one of the pieces of symbolism I kind of get from that is it's a physical thing which you can literally fill up. Whereas the kind of, on your Google Calendar, you kind of put a million things into that, but you can't write small enough on a physical thing to write. If you're writing 2 things in a line, then you're going to notice that on your diary. Yeah. I mean, for example, and it is worth saying, I manage my own calendar. I use automatic scheduling stuff almost not at all. And I don't at the moment, but I have worked with virtual assistants before, and I always thought it makes total sense for them to do my scheduling, but I never did it because I knew that controlling that stuff, maintaining agency in it, was really important to me. So knowing that no one else can know which of these meetings is going to drain me and which one is going to fill me up of energy, which one I'm going to need 45 minutes after it. Or, I can tell them my lunchtime rules, but there'll be some meetings for which I'll compromise those lunchtime rules. I can tell them that I always finish by 5, except I don't always finish by 5, because if the right person, the right thing comes in at the right time and is meaningful enough, then of course I'll skip nursery pickup. And I think that's important. Another thing then, a kind of hackish thing, is I made a decision quite early on in my business and this is ironic because I actually moved this interview, right? Like we were scheduled to do this last week and I moved it. Basically, my rule is I never cancel. So it's not quite true, but basically that if something's going into my diary, whether it's a paid client, something unpaid, a coffee with a friend, or a meeting with someone who might end up paying me 10 grand, they all go in, your word solemnity, with the same solemnity or the same gravity to them.
Yeah.
And the reason I did that was purely for my own sanity, because it was incredibly stressful early on, where I was like trying, basically unconsciously assigning each thing a value. So if a paid client, oh, that's different, or a prospective client, or, it's like, and then I'm having to the whole time work out, do I move this thing? And then once you're moving the thing, then like where are you moving it and who are you moving? And there's an extra
being in
admin
that
task.
analytical space the whole time.
Yeah, and so only in very exceptional circumstances, like the one we had last week, where there was this thing that I had been wanting to do for ages, and it fell. The only thing, it was like I was so lucky. Like the only thing really it disrupted was me and you, and I was like, that's too lucky. But apart from for us, but we're still here a week later, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So I found that incredibly useful, and it does start to get you into the mindset of, look, if this thing, like if I know I'm not going to cancel this, then I'm going to either say yes or no to it now. And if it's not the right thing to do now, no matter how hard that is, then I should say no to it. And that has then been a practice of me getting better at actually doing that and living with it. But it's like I've heard people say, you make one decision, a principle, so that you don't have to make 1,000 decisions over the course of a year. And that one for me is a really good one. So that if I look at my diary, I'm only looking, where is there space for this podcast interview with Alex? Not what could I move around? Like, oh, where's the space? But also, who of these people would it not matter that much if I inconvenienced? And I guess there's partly a values thing in there actually as well, about like, especially with clients, everyone has enough people messing with their diaries. They don't need me doing that as well. I could at least be somebody who is constant.
Yeah, I think the human experience, comfort in consistency, comfort in reliability and security. There's a lot to be said for having reliability or dependability as a value.
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like this specific example changes not so much how you rearrange things, but how you book things in the first place, like you mentioned.
Yeah, and also it does, like when I am rearranging something, I am doing it. I know that I'm telling the truth. When I said to you, and you said no apology needed, this is very reasonable, but I was, that apology was genuine. Whereas I think before I'd be like, oh, sorry for inconveniencing you, but really I was like, well, I'm inconveniencing you because it's just easier for me to inconvenience you, and I actually don't mind that. I mean, I mind it a tiny bit, but really I want to be doing this other thing.
The intent's in there too. Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you. And casting your mind back a little way, where were you at in your life when you first considered coaching?
Yeah, I was kind of mid-career change, basically. So I had a career in the arts. I did a bunch of things in the first decade or so of my career, and the thing that was closest to a longer term career was working in arts and culture. I was living in Yorkshire at the time. I was the manager of some small art centres, and for a while I thought it would be a longer term thing. I was kind of imagining, one day, wouldn't it be like it would? I was looking forward to the idea I could run Sheffield theatres, I could work at the South Bank Centre, whatever that might be, and then at some point I realized that would be a terrible idea for me. And a lot of it was being drained. There was also other shift going on in my life, so of different types. And so I started looking at that a bit more clearly and thinking, no, I need something better than this for the next phase, something that's a better fit, something that doesn't drain me as much. And what might that be? And then I can't remember the exact order. At some point, I realized that some of the things that I'd enjoyed the most were the people-related things. I also had this idea that I kind of stopped being that interested in, like, I certainly wouldn't read about the arts in my spare time. Maybe a little bit of like the odd musician biography or something like that, but I wasn't like excited by it. And I really wanted like work to be as close to something I would do for free as possible.
Mm.
And then at some point I noticed that I was reading a lot of books. I was reading a lot of books about relationships actually at the time because I just had a hefty breakup.
Hmm.
And I suddenly realized that all these books I was reading were written by people who were often called a psychotherapist and a coach.
Hmm.
And that really was when I was like, oh, and then suddenly I was like, oh, it kind of lines up with what I've learned, what I've been thinking about myself, about people. And I am interested in reading these books now, at least in pretty much my spare time. And maybe this would be it. And then I had a little false start. Like I kind of was trying out both counseling and psychotherapy in different ways, like as like going to open evenings and that kind of thing for trainings, and actually kind of looked at coaching a bit and dismissed it. And then got as far with counseling as doing a 2-term course.
Yep.
Before realizing that that wasn't quite the right thing, and then stumbling across a different coaching training, which just felt way more aligned with me. And the rest that was like 10 years ago now, nearly almost exactly 10 years ago, probably now. I was having a conversation with my friend Mike about the training he'd done. And yeah, here we are.
Brilliant. And do you remember what it was about your first brush against coaching that allowed you to dismiss it?
I mean, one thing that my wife says, so my wife came with me to that one, well, girlfriend then, but now wife, and she said she remembers that I was super sick. So it was like a weekend workshop, and I was like full of cold, like so full of cold, and I was really upset about that because I was looking forward to it. I wanted to be, but like, so I was pretty, so that was part of it. But really, I think it was just, the reason it's really good practice to go to a few different open days and open evenings is because you'll get a feel for it, for where the people that you want to study with, the people you want to learn from. And it was more that like on that open day, there were quite a few people there. And really, I remember there being like one great conversation I had, like with somebody. And that was partly maybe because I was there with Emma, like, I don't know, but I think it was that for some reason, they just weren't quite my crowd in that room. And whereas if I think about some of the psychotherapy opening evenings I went to at the time, and certainly when I started connected, I trained with a now sleeping startup coach training called the Coaching School. And when I went to their events, it was a completely different thing, right? It was like almost everyone there was fascinating to me and got into great conversations, and there was a great signal, and the trainers the same, and that was a great signal that was a way better fit.
Okay. Yeah. So you didn't dive in until there was a strong sense of this is a group, or these are people that I could see myself among or identify with?
Yeah, I think so. And at some level, when you're at that stage, I was extrapolating from the trial evening or day into the future. It's like, there's a cool frame that I learned from the organization Career Shifters, which they called the lean career change, which I was really using to get me out of overwhelm, right? Because when you're changing careers, it's like, what the heck am I going to do? How am I going to work it out? This is the rest of my life. It's really overwhelming for me. And my kind of overthinker was in overdrive for years. And there was a lot of like emotional stuff going on because you'd see other people who are like 10 years into their careers or whatever. And you'd be really regretting that I wasn't 10 years into my careers or whatever. So there was a lot going on, but I had this idea from Career Shifters, which is you run experiments. And if you get the good feeling, as low cost, low risk an experiment as possible. So an open evening for a coaching course is a great one. Usually they're free. Occasionally they cost like 30 quid or something. And yeah, like then you get the feel for it. And then if you get that feel, you run the next lowest cost, lowest risk experiment you can run. And if you don't get the feel, you have to go back a level. And that's what I had to do with that first experience. And then I kind of went a few levels down with psychotherapy. And then I got to the end of this training, and it was incredibly frustrating that it was clear to me that I didn't want to do that institution's next training. Like, it was kind of gutting. I really wanted it to be that, because then I hadn't wasted time and I knew where I was going. But it was like a 4-year course, and I just didn't like the teachers. I didn't like the students that much. I mean, I liked some of them, but it was like, it wasn't the right thing. And then I bumped into Mike. He told me a bit about the coaching school. I went along to one of their events. I think I had to pay £20 for it, but it was an interesting workshop. Kept getting that feeling. Gave the trainers what I thought was quite a hard like cross-examination.
Prove it to me.
On it all.
Grab me.
Kind of like in a nice way, but just like, I'm a bit worried about this thing. Like, is there definitely space for the coaches? Like, how does it work? How do you train us? Like, and they gave good answers.
Yeah.
And then to me, it felt like, so my anxious side could be kind of calmed by by what I could tell. What I'm pretty sure about was if I end up becoming a coach, which I might, this will have been a great training for that. If I don't, this will have been still have been a great thing to have learned that I will never regret learning. And basically, my brother, who works, he coaches a little bit, but he works in a kind of coaching adjacent work, and he said of all the people he'd known who'd done coaching trainings, none of them had ever regretted it, right?
Yeah.
Whether they would coaches now or not, and that was enough for me to kind of get through my anxiety about it, and therefore jump in.
Amazing, thank you. Yeah, there really is something so applicable or multi-purpose about coach training. You know, learning how to listen, learning how to hold space for people. It has such an impact.
It's a leadership skill. It's a parenting skill. It's a relationship skill. Yeah, it's everywhere really. And you start like me, if you're curious, like we said, you end up reading like the literature on, or not the literature, the books about difficult conversations, and it's like, oh, good. The first 3 chapters is what I was taught of what the research says makes difficult conversations easier, is what I was taught in my coaching training.
Yeah.
And you find that stuff everywhere. So I think that they're future proof skills.
Yeah. And there's a point of that story I just want to jump back into. This question you asked the trainers, is there space for another new coach? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on, do you feel in this moment there's space for more new coaches in the industry?
That's a good question. I mean, I think the answer is definitely yes.
Mm.
But it's like I am a kind of, like I said, curious, and I kind of like examining these things, so I always want to slow down with it. So actually, the coach training I didn't choose, he had the guy who ran that day had a pretty good answer to that, really, which is like, well, actually, he had an answer to it, which meant that I was pretty sold on it. When he was like, well, look, every good coach is probably receiving coaching. So that means there's a lot of, as the coaching industry grows, there's even more people who are interested and know and appreciate the value of coaching. Now, there's something like, that's true. I agree with everything he says there. There's also something a little bit like pyramid schemey about it. But he's not wrong. I don't remember what Phil from the coaching school said, but what I think now, to me, it doesn't feel like we're maxed out. The market can feel full, but mostly that's because coaching is still new.
Yeah.
And really, in the consciousness of people in a country like the UK, it's still pretty new.
Yeah.
Often people think like, I don't know, like, but everyone's training to be a coach, and that's kind of an echo chamber that we're in when we're training as a coach, because we're meeting that, and then we go on LinkedIn and we notice, you get the kind of biases, and you only notice the things that you're interested in, and then you get more of that. And I was thinking, when we're starting out as coaching on coaching trainings, we often like practice with people we know already. And so you'd think, I noticed this like thought of, oh man, but soon everyone will have been practiced on. And then I checked that, and I was like, no, there's just literally no way that's true. Like in my whole coaching career, I don't know, I've been coaching for 10 years. I've done like 2,700 hours of coaching, something like that.
Yeah.
And probably but it's like a few hundred people.
Yeah.
It's not 1,000 people. And that means that in 10 years, I've only coached a few hundred people, but I have met undoubtedly thousands, right? Anyone who's out in the world meets thousands of people. So it's just like the scale of the world is enormous. The need for these skills is incredibly relevant to almost everything that's going on in the world. And so there's definitely space. And one of the questions that I guess lots of people have got in their mind about everything at the moment is about AI. And so I guess what we'd say, we could talk a bit about that in more detail, but there's definitely space for more great coaches.
Yeah.
Whether there's space for average and poor coaches, like, I don't know, but I think there probably is. But there's definitely space for people who are going to be committed to this for the long term, and committed to learning, and committed to really serving their clients. But that doesn't make it easy. And that's part of when we did some work at the Coaches Journey last year on like, what are we here for? I realized like one of the reasons that's here for me is because too many people quit coaching essentially
Yeah.
because the business feels too hard.
Hmm.
And I think it like you get those weird streets in towns where all the or in cities where all the similar shops are next to each other.
Yeah.
And it's like on one side, it doesn't make any sense, right?
Hmm.
But I think it's because all the people who want to buy electrical goods
We'll go to that
go
street.
to that street. And then they shop around. And so there you've got the concentrated market for buying electrical goods.
Hmm.
But that's really hard to find in the world for coaches.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree that there's space for coaches. Yeah, the industry has space for coaches, and I think what you were saying about coaching still being quite young as an industry put me onto thinking, yeah, there's definitely space for these coaches, and it might be that they are taking steps forward and creating that space, or they have to be a bigger part of the outlining of that space to people who maybe don't know that that space exists and is powerful, rather than there already being an outlined space and a real gap and a need for people looking for coaches, being like, yeah, please come and be a coach. Yeah, there's a very real demand. So what I'm trying to say is there's a very real demand from the market, and often that's unknown. So you'll have to create the awareness that that space is relevant, necessary, and powerful.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And I think that's the bit that feels really hard. I got like an analogy of um like I've never really done this. I think once in Yorkshire we had snow deep enough to do this when I was growing up. But like forcing your way through a snowdrift, right? Like to create the market basically. So a lot of coaches, like the people who sign up to our businesses, some of them are shopping around for coaches, and some of them are literally things that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't somehow created awareness for somebody
Yeah.
of what coaching is, and how it might help them. And then they think, well, actually, I could do this and it might help. And that is expanding the market. But that is like exploring, creating new territory on the map, right?
Yeah.
Whereas there are other ways to do the business now, which didn't exist when I was starting out in the same way, where coaching is being delivered at scale. And you can sometimes get into one of those organizations at the right time in the right way, and you don't have to do the forcing because someone else will do it for you.
Yeah.
Someone else will go into a big corporate and entity and make the case for coaching their people and do all that hard, like forcing out the new territory, cutting, flattening all the snow in this area so that you can run around and joyfully and have fun. I mean, you have to do a little bit because you still have to, often the
Prove yourself,
individuals,
your own credibility, right?
Exactly. And the individuals often need to be kind of sold the concept of coaching, so that they keep coming back. But yeah, there are different ways to do it. And yeah, you're right. I think most of us at the moment are still creating demand, and it's made harder because coach is it's a bit of an annoying word. Like it can mean lots of things, and because there's a wide variety of modalities of coaching and a wide variety of quality of coaching. I had somebody telling me, who I can't remember who it was, yesterday or the day before, that they had a new client who and they were doing it through a pro bono, charity that basically, or an organization that basically offered cheap, low cost to charity CEOs, and found out that the charity CEO's previous coach had been charging £600 an hour, and the woman had been getting nothing from it. So it's like there's a lot of weird stuff in the industry that basically people who are doing it well or trying to do it well are kind of, you're having to battle against as you create that awareness.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And just talking about labels and how we describe ourselves as coaches, just want to share for everyone because I think it's absolutely brilliant. Something I took from Tony Phillips, who's one of Mo's longest standing trainers, was describing themselves as coach, thinking partner, human whiteboard, sounding board, and they had a bunch of other names as well. And I just thought that's such a lovely way to capture some of the nuance that we miss, and to avoid some of the stigma that we hit when we just use the term coach.
Yeah, I love all that stuff. And I tend to come back to, like, also when I notice I have an allergy to a word these days, but this is after lots of work on myself, I tend to come back to, really with an analogy to a word. I'm not saying that Tony has one or anything like that, or that you do, but
I
coach,
do.
I certainly did. Like, I come back to, I would rather reclaim that word and
Nice.
then choose not to use it than to avoid it because I'm worried about what other people will think.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so like I personally, this is the chaos warrior bit, I guess. Like I'm like, nope, I'm gonna take that word, I'm gonna reclaim it, and then I'm gonna be part of making sure that that word means something meaningful going forward by doing good work,
Yeah.
and doing what coaching is, not what people think it is or
Yeah,
so.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's great. And I think it's something we all come across at some point after training as a coach. Some of the stigma, some of the bad actors, some of you've got this. Some of the just impressions we get when we tell people we're a coach, and they're like, oh, does that mean you're this kind of person? Oh, that means you do this. And whoa, no, no, no. I think we've all come across that. Rewinding just a touch to you talking about how where people have already done the work to create space for coaching at scale in organizations. As someone who's worked in a bunch of different associate roles, what advice would you give a coach, perhaps at the start of their journey into associate work, or right at the start of their journey as a coach in total and interested in that work, in order to help them get that role?
Yeah. I mean, generally, like maybe it's that creative force thing that I was talking about at the start. Like I prefer to encourage people to take and hold agency when they're
Mm.
starting out wherever possible. What that means with associate work is steer away from being like what did someone call it? Someone I know called it tender fodder, but it could be like job application fodder,
Mm.
right? Like there are things that get advertised on sites, or you can go to a big coaching provider and apply to work there. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially with the big coaching providers. If you can get in, it can be really wonderful. I've worked for one of them, and it was great in lots of ways until I decided it was time to stop. But generally, these things for me have come the same way my whole business has come, which is through connecting with people. And especially when
Mm.
you're starting out, it's not the only way, but it's definitely the easiest way. Like not the
Mm.
easiest way, the I would say most direct way, which is like make the connections, keep making connections with people. Have every time someone says, oh, you know, the opposite of your like, oh, does coaching mean you do this? Is sometimes you get like, oh, actually, you know, my sister-in-law works for this consultancy, and I think one of the things they offer is coaching. At that
Mm.
point, like take all of those coffees, basically, grab them
Mm.
if you can, because you never know where they're going to come from. Like my friend Joe, Joe Hunter runs this company called 64 Million Artists, and she's now my friend, one of my longest term colleagues in lots of ways. I worked with her for a number of years, although I haven't worked with her directly in the last year. And in my last pre-coaching job, she once put a call out on LinkedIn or Facebook or something saying, I need somewhere to hot desk today. I don't want to be working by myself. And one of my colleagues said, why don't you come and sit at our desk? She came and sat opposite us, had lunch with us. We had met a couple of other times between that, but then out of the blue to me, she invited me in to work with her on a leadership program. And I couldn't have predicted that
Mm.
except by showing up and making connections and understanding. And I did understand that even at that stage of the business, although I don't think I was thinking of it with Joe, that connections are the kind of crucial currency.
Yeah.
And then a couple of things to say about doing that work. I really recommend it. Like doing associate work is great, especially early on if you can get it, because it, you know, for example, I remember selling on behalf of somebody else, and the price that I was told that company sold coaching at was higher than my price.
Mm.
But it was way easier for me to say we charge.
Mm.
I think it was like, oh God, I can't remember. Was it like, it might have been £1,200 for 8 sessions or something. We
Yeah.
charged £1,200 for 8 sessions, or £800 for 5 or something. I can't remember. You know, the two
Yeah.
options. Way easier to say that than it was I charge, I can't remember, whatever I charged at the time, less than that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But then once I'd said it, and someone had said, I mean, even without someone saying yes, I always find with the numbers and the fees, whenever someone doesn't laugh in my face or call me a charlatan, my whole energy around that price changes.
Yeah. 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 Of
So the
course.
first time I made £1,000 proposal, the woman didn't laugh in my face. She was like, yeah, I'm quite up for this. She didn't do it in the end, but even though she didn't do it, I got the sense that she would have done it.
Yeah, the data you collected in that moment said, okay, this is
Exactly.
a reasonable amount, or this is relevant.
And so you get that kind of experience, and you also get to play with other people's ways of working. So, for example, I've done like that company that I was talking about then, it was a very small consultancy run by one of the people who trained me as a coach. And they had some processes, some sets of exercise that they often took their clients through. And my coaching tends to be pretty emergent. It's like, what are we here to do? And then if an exercise comes, it comes. But they had more of a procedure.
Yeah.
Like, okay, in the first 2 sessions, what we usually do is invite the clients to do these exercises and then coach around it. And it was great to practice that. And I had another one where they often ran really short sessions, 30, 45 minutes. It was great to practice that because I got way better at not wasting 10 minutes on chat. Because if you waste 10 minutes on chat in a 30-minute session, I mean, I would say the chat is almost never wasted. It's almost always part of the work. But if you spend 10 minutes, if I accidentally mention something about where I've been at the weekend and the other person gets super interested in that, and we've done 10 minutes of it, that's a lot of the call. And also you get better at, so that really sharpens the blade. And then when you're back to your own business, you get to decide, okay, I could sell coaching where we do 45 minutes some of the time, or maybe actually I want to create a program that I offer sometimes where we always do these exercises at the start because they're the ones that I see to be the most really high leverage for these kinds of people.
Yeah, nice. And just talking about time, it's funny, the example you shared about like an atypical approach was like 30-minute sessions. I worked as an associate for Genius Within, who often would give me orders of 10 sessions of 2 hours in length, or sometimes even 3 hours in length. And like, blew my mind.
3 hours, wow. I've never done that, I don't think, not but planned,
I'm going to break that into 2 hours and then a lunch and then 1 hour afterwards. And just like, those questions of like learning it as still a relatively young coach at that point, learning how I wanted to structure these sessions or how I thought I could make them most useful. And feeling that tension with the inflexibility of the associate contract. Like, this is how we do things here. And I'm like, oh, interesting. Which feeds back into that, like, in where you're at, how you're feeling about it, like how the work feels. But and I totally agree with you. Super useful and gave me way more templates to play with when I was then crafting ideas in my own coaching business.
Yeah. And then probably one last thought on it, just because this is what's been more present recently. So like I said, I think before, I'm about 10 years in now. And there was a couple of partnerships that I had that I realized a couple of years ago, these were amazing partnerships for me. They were like transformative partnerships when I was like 2 to 3 years into my business when I first started them. And then 7 to 8 years in, I was just like, I caught it. It was like, they're kind of still good, but actually they're not kind of serving in the same way anymore.
Yeah, you'd outgrown them.
Yeah, and just in some ways. And just that again, it may be partly my too much novelty in me, right? Certainly my bank balance, I think, would say I shouldn't have shut them both down at the same time. But also you kind of know that they run their course. And like you say, if you're getting frustrated with the ways of working, my experience has been the downsides of them is, I get a lower hit rate of kind of 8, 9, 10 out of 10 matches in that work. So like you still get some. I've worked with some amazing people through associate things. I'm so lucky. But in my own business, because of how it works and the referrals and the filtering processes when people are deciding whether to work with me, they're almost always 8s, 9s, and 10s for like perfect match for me, perfect type of work, perfect person. Brilliant. Whereas in the associate work, and it's great practice to sometimes be working with someone where it's like a bit of an awkward fit. And you still think, I wouldn't have done it if I didn't still think I was like
having a positive impact.
And that I didn't necessarily know they would find somebody better elsewhere, and you don't necessarily know it right at the start, but it that again is good practice. So if we're thinking about getting the reps in of coaching and being exposed to a broad set of things, and often getting good support from outside as well, like the kind of supervision and also not having to hold all of the client stuff, especially if it's an organization. Exactly. Not having to like renegotiate contracts. Like there's a lot to be said for it.
Yeah, thank you. And lovely tangent into associate work. I'm going to move quite quickly now, but I really want to hear, and I always feel like this is a really great question. Talking at my own questions. So you came to coaching and you did your coaching qualification. What happened immediately after your coaching qualification? Talking like that week, that 2 weeks, that month, that kind of time frame.
Yeah. So my coaching qualification took me about 9 months to do. And about 6 months in, I was doing a coaching exchange with somebody else and had the insight that I needed to create more space for it so that I'd been kind of right. Like, or like, no, I said before, maybe it'll be a thing for me to do in the medium term, or maybe it'll just be a skill that I take into whatever else I'm doing. I was like, no, it's a thing to be doing in the medium term. And so by the time I was really lucky and I managed to basically get myself into a job share. So I was working part-time. So by the time I finished my qualification in the February, I think I'd already been part-time coaching for about 6 weeks.
Nice.
So I can't remember exactly after the qualification, but at that period, it was like actually really stressful. So basically, during my program, my coaching program, they set us off to find practice clients, and they actually recommended, which I think is a great idea, although I don't know what the Mo policy on this is, and to charge a small amount of money while you're training, because if you're going to have a business and you're not used to charging for your time, it's good to start practicing that as soon as you can. And so I kind of knew that. So I'd actually had a pretty good response. I think I'd had 5 or 6 practice clients paying me 25, 30 pounds a session during the training in the first 6 months of it, up until about the Christmas. Then after Christmas, I went part-time and I had none, no clients. And that was pretty stressful. And so luckily I had that War of Art thing. So I was like, I'm going to sit down at the start of the day and I'm going to work all day.
Nice.
And so I had that in mind. I'd also been on this training call. And I mean, I had in that time also, I'd also had a bunch of no's. So I'd had a couple of ideas of other ways to find more practice clients, and I hadn't come off basically. But I had a great piece of advice, which really is still in when I'm supporting coaches. This is a story I kind of tell all the time, which is you could start reaching out to people. You can find authentic ways with integrity that you can reach out and do some coaching. And one of the most, I remember this session so clearly, like I did a session with my sister. So often people would say, don't do that. But I actually if you're coaching no one, that is bad news if you want to have a coaching business.
Way worse than coaching someone that might hold some intrinsic challenge for like various reasons.
Such bad news, because it is absolutely, that's my view as well, because you forget everything when you're not coaching anyone. You forget the magic of it. You forget that it works. You forget that you love doing it. Yeah. Like just everything. And so
self-belief.
It's just all goes. And it's a slightly hopeless place to be. And so I got this great advice. One of the frames was something like, think of the people who trust you and who might make referrals to you in your coaching business, and reach out to them and offer to coach them, not because they might become a client, but so that they can really, when they make a referral, they'll really know what the coaching actually is. Yeah. And so I remember walking, I don't remember where it was, but it was probably in like a Costa in, I think it was in West London somewhere for some reason, like Fulham. I don't know why my sister was there, because she used to live way out east. But I think it was in Fulham. We met and did a coaching session. I remember like just after that being like, yeah, we have to do loads. I have to do loads more of this. And the energy got going. And like I think she has recommended people to me, like maybe one or two. I mean, a few prospective people, especially in those first few years, and one I think who was a paying client. But more important than that was the energy that came from it.
Yeah, nice.
And then to go with that, I was all in that. I was doing some outreach like that. I was kind of finishing websites, and I was trying to meet people, basically trying to make connections, following those little threads. And Alex, actually, one of the other things that was going on, I can't remember exactly when, it might have been then, I arranged coffees with a bunch of people. By the time I knew I was going to build a coaching business, about that time when I'd gone part-time, I arranged coffees with a bunch of coaches who had had successful practices. And I kind of talked to them about it and learned a bunch from that. And actually, that's really why the Coach's Journey podcast, which is my podcast, exists. Because over the 5 years after that, I would constantly tell the stories of what this woman or that guy had said to me about how to build a coaching business and what they'd done, and regretted pretty quickly that I hadn't recorded those conversations to share. And so some of the first guests on the Coach's Journey were those people that I'd had those coffees with. Not all of them, but some of them were. And again, coaches will often, people will give a surprising. This was a lesson I'd learned from career shifters in my career change as well. If you reach out to somebody and say, "I'm inspired by what you're doing. I'm thinking of doing something similar. I'd love to learn from what you learned from doing it. Would you have, an hour for a coffee?" People will almost always say yes. Like, surprisingly, people will. It's still surprising to me, but basically people will say yes. And coaches especially, because quite quickly coaches realize we all know how tough it is in those first few months, days, months, weeks, years, because it's such an opaque industry. It's a complex business with no clear, if I do this, I'll definitely get that. And so pretty much everybody's happy to do a little hand up if they can.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. From that, I'm thinking, which of my two brothers, who I think would both find receiving coaching, like being part of a coaching session, quite excruciating, would I be your most comfortable coaching?
Yeah, you never know. So I've done coaching sessions with people I knew, which was excruciating. And I've done ones that I thought would be, that were amazing. And it's good. I always name it at the start, actually, like, this might be weird, because we know each other really well. If it gets weird, we can stop. And that often stops it being weird.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I had a session this week, just on Wednesday, actually, with probably my best friend. They're looking at a career change and career transition, and we're like, I'd love to take you up on that offer you made of coaching. I was like, I offered you coaching? What? I think I offered like like, if you ever want to like get into coaching, like, here's an offer. And we had a coaching session. It was really great, and it was lovely to coach them.
And you just never know when that goes, basically. Like, I mean, you know this, I think, but yeah, on that coaching business flywheel, offering people the opportunities to experience you more. Although there's no A to B, if you do that, you'll definitely have more clients. That is one of the things that I believe, if you do enough, you almost can't help but have a more sustainable business. And we just never know where that seed planted with your friend will go. Like, I think it was a he, you don't know, like, he might have recommended you anyway, and he might never recommend somebody to you. This is like a science, the referrals thing. I just don't understand it. Some people who I think have had a fairly average experience with me send loads of people my way. I got a client at the moment who I've worked with for about 3 years. He spent a lot of money, obviously gets loads out of it. To the best of my knowledge, he's never recommended me to anyone. Like, so I have no idea how it works. But sometimes you do a session like that with a friend, and that's the catalyst for somebody in a year or 2 years or next week.
Yeah. Yeah, that's funny, because I as well, I coach someone weekly. We've been coaching for 3-4 years. They just invited me to their wedding later this year. And they've made one referral. Like you say, obviously get a lot out of it. It's a really positive.
Luckily, you're going to the wedding, so you can just you can convert that 100 people into clients.
Yeah, not quite how I'm looking at that wedding.
How do you know Joanne? Oh well, I'm her coach. There you go.
Yeah, and just think we often talk, actually, this client and I, about the quantity of words that I've written about our conversations, and like, what is it, like 150, 200 sessions now, about their life and how they reflect on things and what they consider to be true in life. Like, I could write a memo. I could write this person's, maybe even, I could write a book. I could ghostwrite a book for this person. Yeah. And the idea of being at their wedding and being like, I've got, like, family members, friends getting up to speak about this person. I've got something to say about this person. I'd love to speak at this person's wedding. I've been seeing this person almost weekly for 3 years, where they've been downloading their thoughts and just sharing straight off the cuff, and like accessing the wisdom that is sometimes hidden to us. Like, yeah, absolutely, I'd love to speak at your wedding, but I don't think that's going to happen.
What a privilege it is, though, when you put it like that, And I was lucky enough to go to you don't often necessarily get to do it. I haven't that many times in my
it's the only time
career.
I've been invited.
I've never been to a wedding. I've got, I've thought about it a couple of times. I've wondered, like, that would be quite a nice thing to do. But somebody was leaving a job in the organization they'd worked in. I got to go to their leaving do. They invited me along, and that was really lovely. But it is also slightly weird. I don't know how you'll find the wedding, because you're out of context. You're out of the normal context. You have this, like, in your case, like, what do you say, 150, 200 sessions?
Yeah. 200
calls with this very specific set of boundaries and rules. Now, of course, after 200 calls, loads of those rules are getting broken all the time, but they're still there. And then suddenly you're in a room.
Not in a room,
with
on a dance floor together.
Exactly right. Yeah, like, I mean, how interesting. It's going to be fascinating.
Yeah. Okay, great. Robbie, we're coming up to time. This conversation's been fantastic. I've started running the end of these episodes with a little series of quickfire questions, and most of them relate to coaching, but being the agent of chaos that I am, I've sprinkled in some non-coaching questions. In as fewer words as possible, running where possible, straight off the cuff, please answer these questions. And starting with one that feels particularly relevant to the immediate conversation we've just been having, what's an unexpected perk you get from being a coach to others?
What comes up is like exactly the thing we've just been talking about, getting to be like in somebody's, it's not really unexpected, but it's getting to be in somebody's life in this really unusual way, sometimes for a long time. It's just like, what a privilege.
Awesome. Next question. What's the most powerful thing about coaching?
It slows us down.
Saying more with less people, Robbie Swale. How much of coaching is the relationship you create with your coachees, and how much is the specific actions you take during a session? 50-50?
I'd probably say 80-20. 80 relationship, 20 actions. But the caveat is the actions create the relationship.
Yeah, they can't be separated.
I don't think so.
Totally. Thank you. What New Year's resolutions did you make this year, if any?
I feel like it's not really a resolution. I feel like I did, but I can't remember. None. Let's say none.
That's the answer.
Yeah.
Most used social media platform in your personal life, if any?
Yeah, I don't really use them anymore, but my personal and work life are a bit confused. So it probably is LinkedIn, for the like 5 times I go on it, if that, 3 to 5 times I go on it outside of work each week. That's probably it.
Yeah. What change would you like to see in the coaching industry or community?
I mean, more integrity about how the business of coaching, more honor and integrity about how the business of coaching actually works. So just like, I would happily just like blow all of those 6-figure, 6 months lead generation people out of the industry.
Thank you. Does ketchup live in the fridge or the cupboard?
We keep it in the fridge.
But does it live in the fridge? We keep it. What about if you're living alone?
Good question. I think I'd still keep it in the fridge.
Okay. What's something you wish more people were talking about in the coaching world?
One of the things that comes up is the coaching business flywheel. I think for the same reason before, and because it'd be good for my business. But essentially, just again, that idea of like, if we could just have more collective understanding and openness about how the business goes. Like, I'd like more people to talk about how much money they actually make.
Yeah.
Instead of like, and I do it sometimes, instead of like having like, oh, I had a 6-figure year, or after 18 months, I had a 6-figure coaching business. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Does it mean you made six figures in 18 months? Does it mean at month 18 you had 100,000 divided by 12? Like, what does it mean? And why is everyone so afraid of talking about money?
Love that. What's your favorite physical stretch?
Like full body, like
hands in the air.
Full body, hands in the air stretch. Well, I was doing it lying down this morning. So
Great.
lovely. Feels good.
Great. And lastly, and feel free to take your time with this one, what's a question you want to ask our community?
So one of the values that's really important to me is courage. I just think it's like, I kind of noticed it when I was starting coaching, the bits of coaching that I would reflect on afterwards, or that would bring tears to my eyes in a session, were always just when people were doing courageous things. And sometimes that'd be like the kind of classic courageous things. But I think I'll probably never forget this one woman who, for her, coming to meet a stranger in the Royal Festival Hall, which is where I was coaching at the time, to begin to think about changing her life was like one of the most courageous acts I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
So the question would be, if you were to be 10% braver
Mm-hmm.
this week or month, what would you do?
Mm. Really lovely invitation, and we'll be putting that on our LinkedIn. Please, listeners, we'd love to hear what you'd do if you were 10% braver or more courageous this week, this month, this year, and what that question does for you. Robbie, thanks so much for joining us on the Mo Pod Ventures. Sure we'll see you around again soon. All the best.
Yeah, thanks so much, Alex. It's been a pleasure, and I'll come back anytime.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Podventures on the Mo podcast. I am Kate, your co-host alongside Alex. If after listening to today's episode you feel compelled to share your story, please email info@mofoundation.com. We would love to hear your story and have you here as a guest on the podcast. If you have been enjoying the Mo podcast, please do leave a review. It helps the team so much understand what you want to hear more of, what type of guest speakers you enjoy. If you want to recommend a guest speaker who you think we should be talking to, let us know. We will endeavour to feature them. If you love Mo so much that you don't ever want to miss an update, subscribe to our channel so that you will be notified every time a new episode comes out and you won't miss a thing. That's all from us today. See you next time.